Welcome to the Health Trip Podcast. My name is Jill Foose. I'm a functional medicine and integrative nutrition health coach. I created this podcast to bring you along as we travel down intriguing, science-packed roads, debunking old medical paradigms and perusing new innovative therapies and modalities with the finest functional medicine doctors, practitioners, and like-minded biohackers while living our best life. Enjoy the show. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode on the Health Trip Podcast. Today starts my Mindfulness for Midlife Women series. I started exploring my mindfulness or lack of earlier this year and decided to support my community, you, by bringing in experts to talk about mindfulness through various lenses. Menopause is this phase of life that brings about significant physical, emotional, and psychological changes, from hormonal shifts and body composition changes to sleepless nights and brain fog and evolving family and work dynamics. It's easy to feel overwhelmed or disconnected, but mindfulness offers practical tools to help you regain your balance, stay grounded, and navigate these changes with greater awareness and compassion. Mindfulness also supports women in prioritizing their self-care. You can't help others unless you put on your oxygen mask first. In this episode, we're going to dive into simple practices that can fit into your busy day, helping you stay present and reduce anxiety, whether through mindful breathing, body awareness, or cultivating self-compassion. The goal is to empower you to approach midlife challenges with calmness and clarity rather than stress and reactivity. By the end of this episode, you'll have a toolkit of mindfulness practices that not only improve your well-being today, but also foster resilience and vitality for the years ahead. Mindfulness is absolutely part of your longevity plan. My guest today is Chris Vasiliadis, and she inspires people to use their well-being as their secret sauce to successfully lead their life. She is a burnout buster. She coaches, she consults, and she has a training firm called Priority Wellness. She specializes in helping overwhelmed and overbusy individuals, teams, and companies to enhance their focus and vitality with systems of sanity so they can run their days without running themselves into the ground. She's also the author of Ignition, a professional woman's guide to energized, burnout-proof living. Being diagnosed with multiple sclerosis indirectly led Chris to becoming trained and certified as a health coach and founding Priority Wellness in 2008. With a combination of luck, genes, and intentional action, she has been relapse-free for over 17 years. And Chris describes herself as a recovering type A personality. I want to be one of those. A short medical disclaimer before we dive in. By listening to this podcast, you agree not to use this podcast as medical advice or to make any lifestyle changes to treat any medical condition in yourself or others. Consult your own physician for any medical issues that you may be having. And this entire disclaimer also applies to any of my guests on my podcast. Sit back, open your mind, and let's dive into mindfulness. Hi, Chris. Welcome to the Health Trip Podcast.
Thanks, Jill. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here. You are starting off my 3-part series of mindfulness for midlife women. And while you're not specifically a mindfulness coach, you call yourself a burnout buster. And it certainly holds true that many women going through menopause and juggling all the physiological changes of menopause and then family life and work life, I mean, there's a lot of burnout in that equation.
Oh, absolutely. Indeed. Yeah. And yes. And my focus on being a burnout buster is more, it came out of me getting kind of a visceral reaction when I see women at whatever age running around like chickens with their heads cut off in going about their day-to-day lives thinking, oh, this is what I need to be successful. And it doesn't need to be that way. There are ways that we can influence and control the pace of our day. And there's a variety of different ways to do that, but mindfulness is a huge one of the main pillars of that.
Yeah, absolutely. It could be sort of like a badge of honor for women to just be going in, 50 million different directions every single day. And at the end of the day, just crashing, right? Just crashing from sheer exhaustion, and really not finding a whole lot of joy or mindfulness moments to have for themselves, sort of to recover and refuel and take care of themselves. So I'm really excited to kick this series off with you. I've read your book. I'm going to hold it up now. I'm also going to hold it up at the end. This is her book Ignition, which I put in the opening. It is absolutely wonderful. I'm not one to read a lot of self-care or self-help books, but this one really captured my attention. What really captured my attention was your inspiring story of how you came to be a burnout buster and help so many people. Could you just share some of your story with us before we move on?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I've been coaching since 2008. And what led me to that is 3 years before I started my practice, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis out of nowhere. At the time, and I explained this in the book, believe it or not, I was working as a freelance makeup artist. So I was at Saks Fifth Avenue doing an event and could not feel literally could not feel my legs from my knees down. It was like the sensation you get when you hit your funny bone. Um, and that began things, one thing led to another, got tested, whatever, and ultimately ended up with a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it's a chronic disease of the central nervous system with no cure. And at the time, I was very healthy at the time. I had three grandparents still living at the time. Like there's longevity in my family. So this came out literally out of nowhere. And and I made the decision I learned a lot about what I can do about that. I went to see my primary care physician at the time and I said, okay, I have this diagnosis. It's my intention to live a fully active, healthy life. What should I be doing? And she lined me up with all kinds of tests. That following year, I called the year of the lab rat, learned a whole bunch of things about myself and my body, and made a whole bunch of lifestyle changes as a result of that. And as a result, health and wellness became much more important to me personally, so much so that I wanted to help other people create their ideal state of health and well-being. So I made the decision, and yes, I was doing makeup artistry at the time I had my first attack, but I was also doing marketing consulting. So I made the decision to change careers, get trained and certified as a health coach, and became that health coach. And when I started my business, I initially focused on stress management, but then over the years, it's evolved into burnout prevention as my specialty.
What an amazing story. And of course, in your book, you go into much more detail. I highly recommend this read. One of the issues that I've seen in my own life, which was what prompted me to even create this three-part series on mindfulness, is that I can't seem to find how to personalize my mindfulness. So if I'm out there and I'm a health coach and I do all the things, right? Except mindfulness sort of goes by the wayside, then there must be a whole lot of other people out there who are in a similar position. And when I think of mindfulness, and when I think of like burnout and how to mitigate that stress in my life, I think of, do I need this special corner of a room in my house or a room in my house with, the soft lighting, the Buddha statue, the incense going, the soft, pillows to sit on, and this whole mood? Because that doesn't resonate with me. And that doesn't resonate with a lot of my clients or people in my community. It might, and there's no judgment, right? There needs to be a mindfulness equation for everybody. I just haven't found mine yet. And so that's why you're here, to help us all personalize our approach in a mindfulness practice so that we can mitigate that burnout life. And so I think the first place I want to start is defining if there is a central definition of what mindfulness is.
Yeah, there's many definitions, and coincidentally, we happen to be recording this on September 13th. September 12th was actually World Mindfulness Day.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and I posted on LinkedIn my four favorite definitions of mindfulness. So if you would like to indulge me, I can share what.
Yes, please.
So and I preface this with saying mindfulness is think of mindfulness as a way of being that you can layer over whatever. You can lay it over a task that you're doing. You can lay it over a conversation. You can lay it over folding your laundry. It can lay it over a work task. So it's an overlay, just like when I grew up in school, we used to have these overhead projectors and they had different films
Mhm.
that they would put on top of each other. Think of it as one of those films. That's exactly what it is. So different definitions that I like. The first is from John Kabat-Zinn, who is a huge thought leader in the area of mindfulness. He says it's the awareness of paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and without judgment. A second definition that I like is from Jeremy Hunter. He says it's witnessing not only what's happening externally, but what's also occurring internally with compassion to help you make better choices and manage the mind to expand what's possible. A third definition that I like is from Corey Muscara, who says it's the practice of being with our experience rather than in our experience in a way that is spacious, curious, and heartfelt. And then the final one I like is from Jonathan Fisher, who says it's embracing what's here in its totality in a wholehearted way. So as I say those, I'm just curious for you, Jill, like what do you hear as kind of the common threads getting woven through that?
I think out of all four of those, the first one resonates with me the most, right? Being present and all in on a task because I'm very task oriented. So that's probably why that one resonates with me. So I'm very type A. And I try to I'm trying to become more present in each moment, even if it is folding laundry, right? Folding the laundry and giving myself a mental break from all the other tasks that I have to do after I fold the laundry, right? And also, I want to bring to attention that it is Sexual Health Awareness Month. And so if we think about applying that first definition to just our sexual health going through menopause, so many of women are struggling here, right? And just if we're talking about getting in the mood, right? And really trying to support that communication with our partner. It is so often that I hear, and it's my experiences as well, maybe yours, that when you're in that moment and you're trying to connect with your partner and be mindful, I have 17 other things going on in my head. There's literally 17 tasks that I could be doing in the same time I should be present in this beautiful moment with my partner who I love. So that really resonates with me too, because in menopause, things have changed for me, like in our 20s and 30s, right? Or especially in our 20s, being in that moment of our sexual experience was super easy. And now as a postmenopausal woman, it's really hard. And that's also another reason why I'm really going on this mindfulness hunt for myself.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, and you bring up a good point. You know, our mind can be constantly racing at from any time when we're doing a regular task, when we're trying to be intimate, and anything in between. And the thing with mindfulness, and I know one of the things you were curious about in this discussion was some of the myths. And one of the myths is,
Mhm.
oh, my mind, I have to completely shut my mind off. Well, no, that's not really what it's about. It's about noticing what's happening in your mind and choosing where you're going to place your focus. So you might
Mm.
have, as you put it, 17 things going on, but it's like, you know what? That might be going on and that's not what I'm going to give my attention to. I'm going to give my attention to this instead. So it's all about where we're choosing to place our attention and not hopping on the thought train of what's going on in your head.
I really like how you put that, right? Choosing which of those 17 items is going to be the priority that in that moment, because everything's temporary.
Totally. Yes. This too shall pass. So yes, and you can choose. In fact, I was just having a conversation with one of my coaching clients about this the other day, is you can have a conversation with that voice in your head that's rattling off these things. And we have cave people brains. Our brain is ultimately trying to protect us and keep us safe. So when the 17 things are going on in your head, it's trying to like make sure you remember this, make sure you remember that, or trying to problem solve or whatever it's trying to do. You can have a conversation with it and say, you know what? Thank you for trying to protect me. I'm good. I've got this. This is what I'm going to focus on now, and focus on what you need to focus on. And that might be enough. you also might need a way to like document what's going on so you don't forget it. So maybe you need to just take a beat, and whether you put it in your phone, whether you write it on a piece of paper, like, okay, I want to make sure I don't forget these tasks. I'm going to write these or remember to do these things, or, oh, I just got a great idea. Good, let me get it down. And now it's out of my head. And now I can focus on what's in front of me.
Such a great strategy because, as you know, women who are in menopause have serious brain fog, and our cognition is just not the same. And I have to write everything down because I will not remember something 2 seconds after I had the thought. So I love that strategy. Um, I want to go into some of those other myths. I think that's really important to talk about. But before we move on, what is the difference between meditation and spirituality? Because I think that that might be a place where people get stuck.
Yeah. So meditation and spirituality is your question? The difference between those two things?
Yes.
Okay. So,
Or no, I'm sorry, mindfulness and spirituality.
okay, cool. So yeah, mindfulness is secular. It doesn't have to be spiritual at all. Like I said, it's like that. It's if you think of all those definitions that I listed, there was nothing spiritual in any of those. It's choosing to be present. It's choosing where you want to place your attention. Now, so you can choose to be mindful and be spiritual. You could also not, if spirituality doesn't call to you, you don't have to do that either, but you can still choose to be mindful. So they're not mutually exclusive, and they can overlap. So yes. Um, and some of no, I'm just going to leave that there before I go to the next question.
I think that's a really good point because sometimes in my mind, I think all these, when I meet someone who I know is a spiritual person, I
Mhm,
automatically think they must be very, very mindful. And they most likely are, right? Because they're just more aware.
mhm.
But I like that they're not mutually exclusive, or they are mutually exclusive, and you can be one or the other and you don't have to be both, because I think sometimes people say I'm not a spiritual person, right? They just
Yeah.
sort of like shut the door on spirituality for whatever reason.
Mhm.
And I feel like sometimes they're just closing the door to being a mindful person as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And that I think what can scare people about being the whole notion of mindfulness. And to your point earlier about, okay, does it mean I have to create this whole room or
Right.
mantle that I set aside? Like you could do that if that's what's going to help you. And we can talk about different ways to build your mindfulness muscles. And that might be something you choose to do as a strategy. But is it required? No, that's not required. Really, simply a choice to decide to be present right here, right now, in this moment. That's
Yeah.
that's really the simplest definition of mindfulness is choosing to be present right here, right now, in this moment.
In all of your years doing this, why do you think that is so hard for people?
Which part?
Being present in a moment right here, right now.
Oh, there's so many reasons why, but I think there's a lot of things grabbing at our attention. These things, for number one, our phones. We're connected 24/7. Excuse me, there's the opportunity to be connected 24/7. We don't have to be, but it's very easy to be connected to 24/7. And we have hundreds of thousands of ways to be informed every day, whether it's through internet, streaming, TV, what have you. Um, there's an overload of information coming at us all the time, and or people wanting our attention. So there's all of that contributes to this, and the fear of the whole acronym FOMO, fear of missing out. Like,
Yeah.
oh, I have to know this. I have to. We don't have to know it all. And in fact, you know, give yourself permission to realize, like, I'm not going to get it all done. I'm not going to do it all. That can be very freeing and very relieving. Like, I have, roughly this amount of time left in my life. How do I want to spend it worrying about the stuff that needs to be done, or do I want to get mindful and alignment with what's most important to me and what do I want to focus on? What matters most? Like
Yeah.
choosing to be mindful is also making moments for like stepping back and evaluating am I operating in alignment with what's most important to me or not? And okay, if I am, great, let's celebrate that. And if not, what do I want to shift and change?
Yep. Yep. Exactly. Um, a couple of these myths I want to talk about because I think
Yeah.
it's important to point them out. One is that mindfulness is just for clearing out your mind.
Yeah. And that's similar to what I brought up earlier. Like, it's just to be quiet. No, it's actually to settle, drop in and settle in to, well, that's kind of a process. So in choosing to be mindful, one of the ways you can do that is just kind of just to choose to drop in, settle in, let your body settle, and see what happens. There's a curiosity to it. So we're not trying to make anything happen. We're choosing to give ourselves an opportunity to explore. And as John Kabat-Zinn often says, put out the welcome mat for what's here. What's here? What's showing up? Like, and that could be what's showing up, like what's in my body, like where am I feeling tense? What sensations am I feeling in my body? What am I hearing? What am I seeing? What am I just aware of in terms of my emotions and how I'm feeling? How often do folks tune into that? Probably not if you're not making mindfulness practice. Um, and so yeah, is that helpful in
Yeah.
dismantling that myth a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Another myth that comes up is that we need lots of time in order to be a mindful person, that you need to have this, like I was describing with the room in your home, right? Or somewhere to go, that you need to have a chunk of time to devote to a mindfulness practice. And there's a lot of busy people who are like, I'm out. Like, that's not possible for me. So if I want to be mindful, how can I do it without this chunk of time?
Yeah. So I generally say to folks, if you to start building your mindfulness muscles, you can think of it as two different branches. One branch is simply to making using life as a lab and making the choice in certain tasks. You know what? And make it a game. Like, you know what? I'm going to be play with being mindful at my next conversation with my partner, or I'm going to be play with being mindful on this next task that I do, and simply just play with that. I'm going to just play with being present, paying attention to this person in front of me, no other distractions, really tune in, listen to what they're saying, and do that. And similarly with doing a task, removing anything that might be an interruption, silencing my phone, putting on do not disturb, what have you, not responding to emails or texts or anything that comes in. And I'm going to stay focused on just this task. So there's no additional time for that. Again, it's a layering on you're choosing how you want to be with this task, with this human. So you can, and again, you could do it in mundane things too. You can do it washing if you hand wash dishes, you can choose to be mindful when you're washing the dishes, like not as something to get through. Okay, let me get this done so I can get on to the next thing. No, you're choosing to be mindful with it. Like, okay, I'm going to notice. I'm going to notice the dishes getting cleaner. I'm going to notice the change in the temperature. I'm going to notice the sudsing up. I'm going to notice the dishes getting cleaner. And you can make that a mindfulness practice. Cooking is preparing a meal is a great way to bring mindfulness to that. Like really being mindful of chopping the vegetables, noticing the color, noticing the smells. So again, I don't know how else to phrase it, but just to continually emphasize that it's this layering on top of what's already here and choosing to
Well,
focus on.
yeah, I like that the examples you're giving are pretty mundane tasks, right? Just everyday living. But what you're saying is it's just you have to practice in order to become better at this. So just like going to the gym and practicing something that you're working on in your workout, just taking these mundane tasks at home or in the office and turning it into a mindful moment, a mindful exercise is going to help that mindfulness muscle get better and better at doing this. And so eventually it becomes more intuitive.
100%. Yes. And so that's the one branch is playing with different ways to be
Hmm.
more mindful. You're basically choosing, you know what, I'm going to be 100% engaged as best as I can be on this person or this task. And then the other branch is to have some sort of mindfulness practice. So that could include mindful meditation. It can include mindful walking. It might be journaling. Um, I uh, my introduction to this whole thing was through mindful meditation, which I still go back to. I meditate every day, and we can talk about that too. But the idea in mindful meditation, the way I was taught is you think of it as attention training. Again, getting back to this whole notice of attention and giving yourself something to focus on. And it's typically with focusing your breath, focusing on your breath, using your breath as an anchor. And you're not trying to breathe any certain way. You're just sitting there and noticing your breath. And your breath the pace might be different today than it was yesterday. It might be deeper or shallower. And so again, it's just noticing with it. And it's not, and again, being present in a particular way, as John Kabat-Zinn says, on purpose in the present moment and without judgment. So we're not judging it. We're bringing curiosity to it, like, gee, what's my breath like today? So we're just noticing that. And, and, I'm going to wrap another myth in here. So another myth with mindful meditation is say I challenge someone to just watch your breath for a minute, and they come back after a minute and says, it didn't work right. I'm like, well, what didn't work? Well, I watched my breath for maybe, I don't know, 5, 10 seconds. Then I started thinking about, dinner tonight and things I have to do tomorrow and everything. I'm like, okay. And then when that happened, did you bring your attention back to watching your breath? Yeah. Well, guess what? Every time you do that, and you're likely going to do that multiple times, even in a minute, that's being mindful. And that's the attention training. So if
Mhm.
you're training your attention to do that, success. So we're not trying to sit and never think of anything else again and
Mhm.
not have distractions come up. It's going to happen. That is completely normal. And that's part of the process. So it's notice, okay, that's happening. All right. And then it's just to gently escort your attention back to the point of focus, watching the breath.
Yeah, I like that. I maybe I am practicing that. I started on this whole mindfulness journey for myself because I started working with women in group coaching. So I group coach women in their menopause journey, and mindfulness, of course, comes up a lot in terms of, what is our greater health vision, right? How do we want to um, come back from these racing thoughts and sleep better? Be mindful about our food and our nutrition, like what you were talking about, being mindful about preparing the meal, sitting down and eating the meal, and just slowing things down when we can and being very mindful in that moment.
Mhm.
One of the places that I don't find a ton of joy is in the gym. I'm one of those women. I do enjoy going to the gym. I've been going for many, many decades. It's like a very intuitive clockwork thing for me. But I discovered in coaching women in menopause that there's a lot of joy to be had outside of the gym. So while a lot of women I coach, I'm trying to help them find that motivation to get into the gym more and do
Mhm.
the work to move the dial for them, get that lean muscle mass and protect their bones. I'm actually trying to get myself out of the gym more to enjoy other forms of exercise that could also bring me joy. So it's not so tightly wound for me. And
Mhm.
so that's really what really prompted this whole mindfulness movement for me, is finding more joy in movement. And in your book, you go over a series of steps to help people discover how to even manage this burnout, manage this mindfulness. And you talk about this burnout assessment. And I thought that was a really interesting tool to use, because a lot of people are just going through life thinking, I'm fine. This is just their norm. This is their baseline norm, is to be stressed out, overburdened, overwhelmed in life, and not being mindful about anything, right? Just sort of cruising along. So talk about some of the steps like your burnout assessment, so that people can, if people are listening and they're thinking, no, this is just my life now, I'll get to the mindfulness part later when my kids are gone, right? Talk about that a little bit.
So are you asking about how might you know that you're approaching or in burnout? Is that really your
Yes,
question?
yes.
Yeah. Um, so it's just like there's a mindfulness definition, there's a burnout definition. So the definition that I have for burnout in my book is this is originally from psychiatrist Dr. Philippe Weston, but it's also a prevalent definition that's out there, which is it's a syndrome of depleted emotional, physical, and cognitive energies. So that's the first part. So there's three parts. That depletion, having an attitude of cynicism, and that's the second part. And then the third part is feeling ineffective or incompetent. So, and that can be a continuum. Like you might get exhausted for so long and then go into a place of feeling cynical, or and then ultimately go into a place of feeling ineffective and incompetent. Or you can come at it from any one of those pieces. So that's a high level definition of that. So what might that look like? Um, you might be forgetting things more often than not. You might get easily distracted. You might feel more addicted to being on autopilot more often. You feel like you're just going through the motions, but in an extreme way. You might be feeling senses of insomnia. You might be more anxious or depressed. You might have more of a short fuse. And just mentally distancing yourself and checking out. So those might be some of the things. Now, and this is if it's happening, if you see a pattern of this happening. Now, we all have our off days here and there. So this isn't like a one-off thing. This is if you or someone who is close to you notices a pattern of, hey, I'm noticing, like if you're missing deadlines at work more often, and that's just so not you at
Mm-hmm.
all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so it's things you're out of character and there's a pattern of these sorts of things happening, you might be in or approaching burnout.
Mm-hmm. So really assessing that 30,000 foot view of what your life is. And I love that these are symptoms of burnout, right? We have symptoms of menopause. These are symptoms of burnout, and really being connected to recognizing these symptoms in yourself and saying, okay, I've assessed my life. I am definitely in burnout or headed towards burnout. I want to be a more mindful person because I want to engage in better sleep and better exercise and better sexual health and better cognitive function. I want to be more mindful about, my nutrition, like all the things, right? So we assess, and then you have another step that says identify your story and recreate your story. And I love this step. This is something I use in my coaching, right? We all have a story. And especially in menopause, we have this final third of our life on the other side of it, right? And what do we want that story to be for ourselves? We get to recreate that story.
Yeah, and we get to decide what the story is that we want to live into,
Hmm.
versus like, well, this is just my lot in life, or though, oh, this is just what I have. Like, no, we always get to choose what we believe it about ourselves, and where we want to go with our life and how we want to use our life. And you might think of the phrase like, do you feel like you're being used by life? Or do you want to use life in a very fueling way? And that's what creating your
Ooh,
story gives you an opportunity to do, is like, no, I want to be useful and be used in a way that nourishes and fuels me. Okay, well, what's that like?
I love that. I really love how you just put that, and how to recreate your story. Such a great exercise. And I think part of that includes remembering and reconnecting to your character strengths, which is another step that you utilize. Um, I also use that online VIA character strengths test. I put a lot of my clients and in my
Yeah,
group coaching, I have them do it because when you're in burnout mode, you forget what you're really good at. And it's those character strengths that you're really good at that you can utilize in recreating the new story.
absolutely. Yeah, and it's so yeah, if you get, especially think of like, go back to that high level definition that I gave about burnout. If you're exhausted and if you're feeling cynical and you're feeling ineffective and incompetent, of course you're not going to be able to think of what your strengths are. So without kind of taking a beat and consciously deciding, okay, I need, and kind of tuning into, okay, what do I need? And this is where the compassion of mindfulness comes in. Okay, if I were to be really compassionate with myself, if my best friend were going through the same exact thing I was and in my state, what would I tell them? Like, okay, this is what's going to fuel you and nourish you and and then follow through with that. That's actually one of my favorite definitions of self-care, is noticing what needs to be fueled by you and then taking the step, okay, I need to follow through on that, whatever that might be. I might, in this moment, I might need a nap, or I might need to look at my calendar and clear some social things off my calendar. Like I'm done for this week. So I'm going to need to cancel some things too, because I just need to regroup and whatever. And this is, I'm literally spitballing right now, but it could be so many different things to
Yeah.
just decide, okay, figuring out what is going to create some breathing room for you, because we can so easily say yes and and get overloaded. And so does things need to be offloaded? Do things need to be delegated personally or professionally? Um, if you have children, are there age appropriate things that they can take on more? If you live with other adults in the house, can the other adults take up more? Yeah, and again, and you can apply the same thing in work, with teams, or raising your hand with your manager to get offloaded and things like that. So yeah,
But
a
how
lot of
can you use your character strengths to make these changes?
So, like you and I both refer to the VIA character strengths tool. So if anyone who's listening just Googles VIA character
Yeah,
strengths,
I'll put it in the show notes.
yeah, it's a free
Yeah.
tool that you can go and assess your strengths. So it'll give you, it goes through all of them. I forget how many total is. Is it 25 or something
Yeah.
like that? You get like
Mhm.
the top five. They rank them all, but they present you with the top five. So, and then you look at that and decide, okay, how actively am I using this strength? And if I am, great. And if I'm not, where can I amp up this strength personally or professionally in my life? So, for example, if a strength of yours is organization, you know, how can you then bring that to, okay, what needs to be reorganized here? Where do I need a reset? And what does that reorganization look like? It might be reorganizing your calendar. It might be reorganizing clutter in a house that's driving you nuts. It might be um, organizing your day, how you approach your day. So that could take a whole bunch of different things, but it can be really helpful too to talk that out with someone too. Like sometimes it can be hard to self-reflect and see how we can use that. So you might talk that out with a friend, talk it out with a coach or someone you trust. It could, yeah. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can approach that.
And in my coaching, if someone's one of their top character strengths was organization, we would want to use that. Let's say they're on a weight loss journey, right? How can they be organized in preparing meals? How can they be mindful about preparing meals and being in that moment to enjoy the meal that they just set up this whole organizational way of creating it, going to the grocery store, picking out their recipes. I mean, this is something that I work on all the time with my private clients, right? And I love using character strengths. Some people have character strengths of humor, right? How can you infuse humor into reaching some of your health goals and being more mindful about using humor, right? And getting a good laugh out of the things that you're trying to do, not be so serious.
Yeah.
So I think character strengths are unbelievable. It's one of the things I do in the first session is have them do that VIA character strengths test. So they can remind themselves what's already within them. They don't have to recreate the wheel. It's already there. Maybe it was just a little bit hidden or stored away because they had kids and this work life or a bad marriage, but they get to bring those character strengths back up to the forefront and utilize them moving forward in their life. Another thing you talk about, which I think is genius, is energy infusers and drains. And
Yeah.
this is something that I didn't even know I was doing it, but I was doing it when I was going through my divorce many years ago, right? What drained me and I didn't need in my life anymore, and what gave me energy, what gave me life and passion.
Yeah.
And making some of those decisions, you do need to be very mindful about, especially the energy drains, right? Being really honest with yourself. What's not working for you? What are you willing to give up? And that, I suppose I was very mindful about that.
Yeah, and it is, and again, it's not often something we stop and ask ourselves,
Right.
what's fueling me, what's draining me. And that could be anything from certain people, it could be certain tasks, it could be um, household chores. Um, It could be things that you're doing manually that maybe could be easier if they were automated. It could also identify certain boundaries that you might need to set around, okay, I'm saying yes to all these things, and I'm really, I've been on this committee forever, and pick whether it's school related or professional related or what have you, like, this is not, when I first did it years ago, it was awesome. And now it's just a chore to go there. Like, okay, I think I need to reevaluate getting off there. So oftentimes you don't just check in like, okay, it's time for new. Yep, I'll go ahead and do that. And we're not being mindful of like, do I really want it? Is it still, helping me? And it's not that we, completely clear the decks, but it's just being discerning on what we
Mhm.
decide to take on.
Absolutely. Yep. You also talk about creating different spaces in your life. And I thought that was so as people are listening to this, they can see that mindfulness is not about just going into a room, sitting down and meditating, right? We are now infusing mindfulness in the kitchen, in the office, in raising our children, in going into the gym, getting out of the gym, right? So mindfulness is just everywhere now. And I love these. I want you to talk about these different spaces where we can create different ways to be mindful.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're talking about the chapter play in energized
Ye-
places. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yes.
that addresses there's different energy buckets you can consider:
Mm-hmm.
physical,
Yep.
mental, emotional, or spiritual. So you can think of it just like there's different types of fuel. When you go to the gas station, there's the regular plus and super plus. Um, we have different buckets of energy that are available for us to tap into, and it's being mindful about what do we need to run our lives the way we want to run. Like, just like if your car functions on regular gas or super premium, if you got to make sure you put the right fuel in the tank so it's going to run properly. And it's the same way, it's the same for us as human beings. We are not robots. We need to be fueled in different ways. And perhaps how we were fueled in our 20s and 30s is different than how we're fueled in our 40s, 50s, and 60s. So it's bringing to mind what's the right fuel for us now. So for example, and certain things that fuel you might tick the box in a bunch of different buckets. So for example, physical energy. So physical energy is just overall health, what helps you have overall health. So that could be the food that you eat, it could be exercise, it could be the people that you associate it with. Um, any of those might contribute to physical health. Um, and then there's emotional energy, which that's giving you a sense of happiness. Well, that could also be the people that you hang around with. That could
Mm-hmm.
also be the form of movement that you choose. That helps your endorphins. So it's making sure that we have what fuels each of those buckets in sprinkled out throughout our weeks and months. Not that you necessarily need to take each of these buckets every single day, but have a routine rhythm of making sure that these sorts of things are addressed.
So if someone's listening to this and wondering, okay, how do I recognize or create these buckets for myself? What are some steps for them to do that? Because some people do live in a very compartmentalized world, right? Like I know my mind, I like things all lined up, bucketed and organized, it makes my life a lot easier. Not always the best approach. But for someone like me or someone listening, how do we gather up all of these types of energy and figure out which buckets they need to go to, and then also recognize which buckets might be overflowing versus buckets that might not be full enough.
Yeah, so there's a few different ways you can go about that. You can either like set aside a chunk of time and make a list. I have some tables in the book
Yep.
that has a list of, you can identify, okay, here's what gives you physical energy, what gives you emotional energy, that sense of happiness, what gives you mental energy, what helps you focus, and what gives you, I have spiritual energy, which I have as a sense of purpose, like feeling you're on purpose, on task, connected to higher source or higher cause, or even it might be a charity or values that are important, making sure you're operating in alignment with your values if spirituality doesn't work for you. Um, And so you can do that initially. It's almost, you can consider that somewhat of an energy audit of considering, okay, let me consider each of these four buckets, which of these things, uh, which kind of tactics and approaches help me fuel those buckets today? Or what have I thought about doing? Like, I have no idea what I want to do, but I know this person in my life who seems to really be focused really well. Gee, I'm going to find out what they do that helps them focus. Or I, I feel like I haven't had a lot of joy lately. What do I think brings me joy, or what has brought me joy in the past? So there might be some internal thinking and pondering on this. So it might not be something you do in like 15 minutes. You might need a little bit of time to process. So that's one way you can approach it. Another way you can approach it is look at your calendar for the next week, see what's on your plate, and ask yourself, what's the kind of physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual energy I need to be as successful as possible in executing, making that calendar happen, making those appointments happen well. And that could be your own appointments, your kids' appointments, caregiving, spouse, parents, young ones, what have you. What's going to help me be my best self? So how do I need to be fueled? And so people who think that way, you can then decide, okay, I need to make sure that I have a healthy lunch every day. So I want to make sure that I pack my lunch, or I need a walk in the afternoon for me to have a sane day. So building that in, or you know what? It's really important to me to stay reconnected with the most important people in my life. So I'm going to make sure I have one social connection with a close friend once a week. And a social connection might be a phone call, it might be a coffee, it might be a text, hey, checking in, thinking about you, how you doing, kind of thing. So so I'm giving all these different examples of stuff that takes a lot of time, stuff that could take a matter of seconds, and picking and choosing what's going to work for you based on your calendar for the week.
Yeah, I really like that idea. I actually am very old school and still use a paper calendar, and I have
Okay.
to visually see everything from Monday to Sunday on my paper calendar. And that way I can then, well, I guess without knowing I was utilizing these buckets, I can then go into these buckets and say, okay, I need this to get through this part of my week. I need this from this bucket to get through this. And I also then I do start to cancel things. I start to prioritize what am I expected to do, like non-negotiable. And then I look at all of the negotiables and I can start to move them around and shift them because I don't like when I'm overwhelmed during the day. That does not work for me. It makes me exhausted. And then I really can't be focused on the task at hand. So I really like that a lot. How people do it on their phones, I don't know. Like that would just drive me nuts. But the generations below us certainly are more adept at utilizing their phones and being more mindful about their time. Um, Someone's listening and they're thinking, okay, she's talked about mindfulness, we've talked about spirituality and the difference, we've talked about all these buckets and different strategies, and leaving this conversation still feeling a little bit overwhelmed.
Okay.
What is some advice or beginner strategies for that person who's struggling with mindfulness, just really going down to the bare bones of this?
Yeah. I guess the initial question would be asking yourself, what's even motivating me to want to be mindful?
Mm,
So ask yourself that question first. Like, why do I want to be mindful? What do I think? What do I think it's going to give me? And that's a personal question for each person. I mean, for me personally, I feel like it helps me. It's like a superpower when I'm more mindful because it helps me be more engaged in my life, and it helps me make wiser. When I'm mindful, I'm making more wiser, conscious choices than when I'm not. And things tend to go better when I'm making more wiser, conscious choices. So for me, it's worth it. Um, and then it's deciding, okay, keeping in mind those two branches that I talked about. Okay, do I want to start playing with being more mindful in my just everyday tasks, and pick something easy to start with, whatever the next task is that you're doing. And again, whether it's a conversation or whether it's a task, okay, I'm gonna play with being more mindful and just see what that's like. Here's one. We're recording this at the it's almost fall, football season, sporting activities for the kids, etc. Maybe the next time you go to a sporting event, I would challenge you, don't pull out your phone the whole event. Focus completely on that event
Mm,
and see what that experience is like. See how easy or difficult it is to pay attention to the event. And I'm always amused and again, I am not 100% perfect at this myself, but it's always funny to me when I'm a big baseball fan. So watching a baseball game and then they show the fans in the stands and like 90% of them have their heads looking at the phones versus watching the game that's right in front of them.
hmm.
So yeah, like that could be some relatively simple to play with, but deciding to do that and or deciding to take on one of the practices that I spoke about building it, whether it's again meditation, mindful walking, journaling, and to start with meditation, I mentioned a minute earlier, you could literally start with a minute, like I'm just going to sit for a minute and watch my breath, and you can do that with your eyes open, your eyes closed, whatever works for you. And if watching your breath doesn't work for you, like light a candle and watch that. Or just be still and listen, see what you can notice what you listen without really trying hard to listen. Just notice what you listen, or just notice how your body feels. You can be mindful when you're driving the next time you get to a stoplight. Just be mindful and like just notice how your hands, what sensations you're feeling in your hands. What are the sensations I'm feeling in my feet? What do I notice about how I'm feeling now and what's going through my head? And you bring a sense of curiosity to it, not judgment. Oh, that's interesting. That's what I'm feeling right now. Okay. So again, overlay it on whatever. You can do this waiting in line. The next time you're waiting in line somewhere, and we're all waiting in line somewhere at some point, rather than grabbing your phone and being, occupying yourself with that, tuning into like, okay, I'm going to feel my feet and I feel my hands. I'm just going to notice the people around me, notice what I see in this room. I'm just going to notice. And that's being mindful right there.
I really like the way you're describing these beginning strategies because it really takes the pressure off. It takes the pressure off of all of a sudden jumping into, excuse me, jumping into meditation, right? Which is really, really challenging for a lot of people. A lot of people just don't want to meditate, but there's other ways to um, meditate and be mindful other than just sitting still. For example, one of the most successful ways that I can be mindful and sort of weave in meditation is I walk my dogs every morning and I don't look at my phone because I'm walking, and I don't turn anything on in my earphones. I have my earphones in case I have to get a call from one of my kids, but I suppose I could turn the phone off, right, and go even a level higher. But I don't listen to anything. So I hear the birds, I hear the waves. I live across from Lake Michigan, so I can hear all this nature, which really brings me a lot of joy. And it's one of my it sometimes my boyfriend will say, "Do you want me to go with you?" And I say, "Absolutely not. Like this is my time. It's my 20 minutes of just me, the dogs, and just nature sounds." And I absolutely love it. So it doesn't have to be so complicated. Just pick, when I'm working with women on weight loss strategies or longevity, and maybe they're trying to incorporate more protein, we pick one meal, just one meal for a couple weeks that you focus on that then becomes more intuitive for you before you even tackle a second meal.
Yeah. So
So
true.
yeah, I really like
Yeah.
these strategies.
It's baby steps.
Yes.
We're not trying to make you a yogi overnight, and we're, not trying to reach perfection here. But again, I challenge folks to think about, okay, what's appealing to me about being more mindful? Yeah, and for me, it gets back to it's really having reverence for life and realizing, nothing's guaranteed. Tomorrow's not guaranteed. The only thing that's real is this moment that's right in front of us. So why not make the most of this moment?
Yeah, absolutely. And as women are moving through menopause and getting on the other side of it and realizing they have a third of their lives left, all of a sudden careers might change, right? Their vision of their career might take a complete, 360. And they might go into a very different direction, or perhaps they're facing retirement. Um, their kids are gone, right? There's a lot of room to explore. And I think mindfulness is an essential ingredient in that pathway.
It is. And as you bring up all those things, Jill, it's reminding me that kind of another mindfulness principle is being in acceptance with what's here.
Mm,
And being in acceptance doesn't mean we have to like it. It often may not mean that we don't like it, but we're not resisting and pushing against it. It's accepting like, okay, this is here. Now, how do I want to be with this? How do I want to relate to what's here? And um, menopause is also it's very individualized. Your experience might be different than my experience, etc. And there's a lot of unknowns in it. We don't know how it's going to evolve. We don't know how long it's going to be. The whole postmenopausal process, well, actually all aspects of it, during the process, and then after. So there's a lot of unknowns here. And that's kind of a microcosm of life. We
yeah.
don't know how long we're going to be here. We don't know what tomorrow is going to bring. Um, and so it's being in this place, we can have expectations, but then there's also sometimes our expectations might not be met. And how are we okay with that? And how are we okay with, okay, this is not what I expected, and this is what's here. Now, how do I want to be with this?
Yeah.
And when we're able to have a sane approach to that, that is what's going to help us. And I get back to the whole thing of like making wise choices and taking wise action. I'm like, okay, this is what's happening. Now, how do I want to be with this?
Yeah.
Um, and also, in the context of menopause, it's also noticing the changes that are happening in our body and being confident that this is different for me. So when we're expressing that to the people on our medical team, being confident and relaying like, yeah, this is different and this is what's changed, and not feeling like, oh, this is all in my head. Like, no, this is different. And so being able to be mindful during menopause, we're able to better notice, yeah, this is a new thing, or this is off, or this is different. And I need to share this with someone and be okay with sharing that.
Absolutely. And finding grace and compassion along the way.
Yeah.
So if you're out there and you are wondering, how am I going to put all the pieces to this mindfulness practice together? I am telling you her book, Ignition. So you can see this as I'm holding it up on the YouTube portion of this, that in her book, she has all kinds of places to write and chart and list and start creating that wellness vision that you talk so eloquently about in this book. It's really helpful. I'm actually going to go through it a second time and actually write down. I didn't want to um, do all the writing now. I wanted to get through it, but I'm going to go back and I'm actually going to go through all of the different exercises you offer in here. I think they're absolutely genius, so helpful, so poignant at this time in a midlife woman's life. And Chris, it was such a pleasure to have you on here to kick off my mindfulness series. Um,
Well, thank you,
bringing,
Jill.
yeah, just coming from the lens of burnout, which all of us can relate to.
Yeah, well, it was my pleasure. I could geek out over this stuff forever. It's my, and again, it comes from that place of seeing women overextend themselves consistently and realizing like, yeah, there's another way of being that's
Yeah.
not, you know, that you can choose another way of being. And a lot of the principles that I share in the book will help you make that change
And still get things done,
and
right?
still get things done. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Totally. So where can people find you?
So I'm most active social media wise on LinkedIn. So that would be the best place to find me. I also have my own website is prioritywellness.com. So you can learn more about me there. And yeah, so those would be the best two places to find me.
And can you buy your book off of your website?
You can't, the website will link you to where it's available. So there's a link called an
Okay.
e-submission book, and you can get to it
Great.
that way. Yep.
Great. Great. Well, thank you again for joining me today. I know there are a lot of golden nuggets in this conversation for women to walk away with and start implementing in their own lives. And thank you everyone for tuning in.
Thanks so much, Jill.
Thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. Lifestyle changes can be hard and overwhelming to make. By building your support team of functional medicine doctors, therapists, and health coaches, you can reach your optimal health goals. Be sure to check out my other podcasts. Until we meet again, stay healthy.